on target.
Almost there.
Stay on target.
They're right behind me.
Almost there.
What?
Hello and welcome to this edition of Yakima On Target. I'm your host, Sean Davido, and today I'm joined by Randy Beehler, the Communications and Public Affairs Director for the City of Yakima. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me.
And Randy has the unique distinction of being our first return guest on Yakima On Target. I don't know if you know that, but you are the first person that we've had back. We've done about 25 to 30 of these, and you're our first guest to return over the last year and a half. Thank you for being back on.
Well, I appreciate it. It's an honor.
Thank you very much. And speaking of transition, we're going to hop into our interview here. So the City of Yakima is in a little bit of a transitionary phase. We've got a new interim city manager, and we've got some new council members coming in. What's the course for the city at this point?
So it wasn't very long ago. Alex Meyerhoff is the interim city manager. He's been here just a short period of time, only a matter of a couple of weeks. And he was being interviewed by a local reporter not long ago, and the reporter asked him, well, what are your initiatives that you want to, what do you want to bring to Yakima? What do you want to implement here? And Mr. Meyerhoff's response was, well, as an interim city manager, it isn't my job to come in and implement new plans. Really, what I'm here to do is to keep the ship on course, to keep it heading in the direction that has already been established through actions of the council over the last recent period of time. So the challenge for us in the next few months here as staff and as elected officials for the city is to keep the city moving forward on a consistent basis. Probably not going to see a lot of innovative programs that are services or ideas that are generated from the city manager's office. It's the city manager's job to implement policy set by the council. That's how that works. It's not really the responsibility of the city manager to lead policy, but to follow policy that's established by the council. So with the 3 new council members that will come on in January, I'm sure we're going to see some initiatives and some new ideas from them to then be implemented by the city manager and staff.
Now there is some talk about change of the form of government in the city. Can you describe the city's role in that? Where are we at in that process? I know that the new council is looking at some options. Where are we at, and what is the process moving forward?
Well, the process for changing a form of government is what it's referred to in Washington State. There are 3 forms of government that are authorized in Washington State. One is called a council manager form. That's the form that the city of Yakima operates under currently. Mayor council is another form. And then the 3rd authorized form is called a commission form. There are no cities in Washington State that run under a commission form anymore. What's kind of interesting, I think, is that Yakima has run under all 3 of those forms of government. When Yakima was originally founded, the only form that was authorized was called mayor council. Then in the 1940s, late 1940s, the council manager form was allowed to be authorized. I'm sorry, commission was actually before that. And so Yakima's transition was from mayor council to a form that's called commission, which is not like a county commission, which a lot of people are familiar with. And then in 1958, voters chose to transition Yakima to a council manager form of government, and it took effect in 1959. The city's role, the city, if you think of it as an entity, is in ballot measures, which is what a form of government vote is a ballot measure, 2 voters. Only voters can change the form of government. Right. The council can't do it on its own. Obviously, staff can't do it either. But the role of a city entity, a governmental entity, under state law for ballot measures is we cannot use city resources, being staff, being a computer, frankly, pieces of paper, to be in opposition to or in support of a ballot measure. A council, an elected body, could choose to do that as a group. They could do it individually. Council members could endorse or oppose a ballot measure individually. But at this point in time, the council hasn't been asked to endorse or oppose the change in form of government ballot measure. That may occur, but by placing it on the ballot, the council is simply saying that this is going to be a question for voters. The council is not endorsing the proposal, by simply placing it on the ballot.
Okay. Now, interim city manager, permanent city manager, how does that affect the search for a permanent city manager? Is that on hold? Where do we go from there with that process?
So the only employee in the council manager form of government, which is the form that the city of Yakima currently operates under, the only employee that the council hires is the city manager. Mm-hmm. So it's the council that is in charge of deciding how to utilize that position. The current council has decided, since there is this question, this form of government change question hanging there, that it would not be pertinent to hire a longer-term city manager. I kind of shy away from the term permanent,
right,
because they're not going to be here forever. Yeah. But a longer-term city manager, it would be very difficult to recruit someone into a position, yes, that may not exist within a short period of time based on the outcome of a vote.
Right.
So that's why we have an interim city manager.
Okay. We're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about Initiative 976. Shift gears. Transportation. No, obviously, that will affect the city of Yakima's transportation budget. How will it affect? What will it affect? Where are we at in that situation?
So just a tiny little bit of history without getting super technical. A couple of years ago, the city council established what's called a transportation benefit district. Right. Under state law, that's the first step in then applying a car tab fee that is dedicated to transportation infrastructure projects. Right. So the first step was establish the transportation benefit district. The next step was establish a project list. Then the third step is actually implement the car tab fee. The car tab fees began being collected in the summer of 2018. Mm-hmm. July, that's the fiscal year of the state, is June to June, June 30 to June 30. So the city started receiving those funds in the middle of 18. There are 19 projects on that Transportation Benefit District, or TBD list. Yeah. To this point, and that was a 20-year project list. Yeah. So far, about 3, I think, have been completed. Some repaving, some new sidewalks, replacement sidewalks. But most of those projects, and phase 1 of the North First Street revitalization
which is almost complete, correct? Phase 1 is almost complete.
It is. Buttoning up small things right now. The estimated completion date was the end of this year, and the contractor will easily make that. But without that revenue, why that car tab fee revenue is so important is because we don't have any other identified resources to put into large infrastructure, transportation infrastructure projects like the North First Street Revitalization Project. It's a $15 million project in 3 phases. The reason we needed that car tab fee revenue was to go out and take out what we call bonds. Most people would think of them as loans. We don't have $15 million sitting in a bank that we could just spend on North First Street. We go out, take out a loan, a bond, and then that revenue, that income, paycheck if you will, is dedicated to repaying that loan. Without the car tab fee revenues, we don't have any way to repay loans in the future. So those remaining projects on that transportation benefit district list, unless something changes with regard to I-976, there are lawsuits that are being filed about that item, then those remaining projects on that transportation benefit district list, including the final 2 phases of North First Street revitalization project, won't happen.
Now, will they go away? Will they just remain idle until possibly someday down the road there would be funding for them? What happens to those projects?
Well, so the city also, all cities, develop what are called transportation plans.
Right.
They're a 6-year transportation plan. So all of the projects that we have identified we need to do, which add up to $80+ million, are on that list, and they get completed based on the availability of funding. Right. And just because something's at the top of the transportation plan list doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to get funded.
It's the next project.
Most of the transportation projects, large ones, in Yakima are funded with either state funding, federal funding, or a combination of that with some local funding. But those are competitive grants. Right. So if we apply for a grant for number 15 project on the transportation plan list, and that gets funding, we're going to do that before the one that's listed number one. So the transportation benefit district projects that are still there but haven't been completed will remain in the transportation plan, but they'll no longer be part of a transportation benefit district list because the transportation benefit district won't exist.
They'll be reprioritized to some
In essence, yes. Yeah. But if those needs don't go away,
right. Yeah.
it's just we don't have revenue to complete them.
Right. Let's move to another hard subject. Let's talk about homeless issues in the community. It's one of the main topics that many people talk about. What is the city doing? What are other organizations working with the city to solve the problem?
Well, it is a challenge. Homelessness is a challenge in Yakima, just as it is for cities all across Washington State and all across the country, to be quite frank. And the rise in homelessness, there are any number of reasons why, but part of it is tied to the reduction of behavioral health services provided by the state in Washington State, and also less incarceration in Washington State. So you have those people who fall into that spectrum who now don't have any place to go. The challenge in Yakima is being met on a number of levels by nonprofit organizations that provide services that ranges from the Union Gospel Mission to Camp Hope to Neighborhood Health. I mean, there are a whole list of nonprofit organizations helping with the homeless problem. The city also is somewhat hamstrung by an appellate court ruling from a couple of years ago out of Boise that makes it really, really hard for us to enforce any, or even have in place, any sort of requirements or regulations that would prevent people from hanging out in a park, or even on any public property during the daytime. It's very difficult, given this ruling, for cities to have an impact that way. What the city has implemented is a program called Clean City, and a lot of it is targeted towards areas that are oftentimes populated with homelessness, with homeless people. And it involves regular litter pickups. It involves emptying garbage cans on a more regular basis. It involves going and getting shopping carts, which have literally been stolen from businesses, collecting those carts and returning them to those businesses. Plus there's an increased effort on the part of police to move people along. One of the things that the city is not investing a lot of money in is arresting people for infractions that are connected to their living situation. There are a couple of reasons why. One, it's not very effective. Two, it's very expensive. And three, we don't have a lot of authority, as I just explained, to do that. We're hopeful that many of the partnerships that the city has with the nonprofit providers, plus the city council just about 3-4 weeks ago implemented a new tool that allows the city to recapture a portion of sales tax that normally would have gone to the state. We will now keep that in Yakima, and that money has to be spent on affordable housing projects. The Yakima County, the county commissioners recently imposed a tax that will be used for mental health and substance abuse services out of a campus where a former jail right next to the fairgrounds. So there are a lot of things going on right now to try and help address homelessness in Yakima. It's going to take a little bit of time to see what the results of those are. But rest assured, it's a high priority of the city to try and deal with homelessness as best as we can.
And not a lot of simple solutions out there for that, right?
It's very complicated, a very complicated issue from a social standpoint to an economic standpoint, from a behavioral health standpoint, substance abuse. It is very complex.
Yes. Now that's one of the challenges. We've talked about a couple of other challenges. Are there other challenges you see for 2020, and what are some of the highlights that the city can look forward to?
Well, the council is in the last stage right now of approving a budget for next year. And that's really a key responsibility of a council. A legislative body is approving a budget. the council spent several months going through the proposed 2020 budget with some concern about availability of resources.
Right.
State law requires that our budget be balanced. Not a lot of people know that.
Yeah.
They make assumptions that, because we hear about a deficit on the part of the federal government. Cities can't do that. We cannot operate with a deficit. We have to have income, resources that match our expenditures.
Right.
And very fortunately, that was able to be accomplished in the 2020 budget, with a little bit of money going into what the city refers to as a reserve account.
Right. Yeah.
Some people call that a savings account or a rainy day fund. That's necessary to have that in place. It's like your personal savings account.
Right.
It's necessary to have that in place so that we have the ability to borrow money. Everybody knows a credit rating.
Right.
Cities have credit ratings. It's the same deal. And when somebody might consider, a banker considering giving you a loan for a new house, they're going to look at all that and say, well,
how much money do you have in savings?
right. And that's the same thing with the city. The council made a commitment a couple of years ago to rebuilding the reserves up to the standard accounting level, which is 16.7%.
Yeah.
A couple of months of operating money.
Yeah.
This is how much it costs to operate the city for a month. Like your house, say it costs you $4,000 a month to pay your water and your sewer and your mortgage and all that. City's in the same boat. That's what the city is working toward now, is rebuilding that savings account, that reserve, so that it's at that appropriate 16.7% or 2 months operating by 2022. And the city is on track to do that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Anything else? We've talked about a lot of stuff. Is there anything else, any information we need to get out to the public?
I think we always make this pitch that the government is the people's government.
Right.
And we want to be responsive to our community and our community's needs and desires, and that takes involvement. If we oftentimes, not the only time, but oftentimes we'll only see people when something that government is doing was negatively affecting them. Yeah. And that's understandable. People are busy. They have a lot of stuff going on in their lives. But I guess what I encourage people to do is pay a little bit more attention to what's going on with your local government. Get involved before there's an opportunity, before the opportunity is a negative one. Yeah. And certainly participate by voting.
Yeah.
That is a very unique and a very valuable right to have in the world. Yeah. And it's really your obligation, I think. Not only your right, but also your obligation to exercise it.
Wonderful. That's all I've got for you, if that's all you've got.
Obviously, I could continue talking.
I'm sure you could. But we'll stop there, and we'll have you back on again for a third time at some point.
Great.
All right. Thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for joining us on Yakima On Target. For more information about the City of Yakima or news involving the City of Yakima, visit www.yakimawa.gov or email Communications and Public Affairs Director Randy Beehler at randy.beehler@yakimawa.gov or call the Community Relations Office at 509-575-6092.
Stay on target.
Almost there.
Stay on target.
Almost there.
What?
For more information on YPAC programming, please call 575-6092.